Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and today I am very honored because I am joined by a very special guest. She has a brilliant YouTube channel where our guest talks about many topics, many topics. And I'll try to ask our guest about those topics on a great YouTube channel. But among those great topics is films and cinema. And so I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to talk with her and to get her insight into cinema and the arts. And this is Jerome Weiselberry, the channel Jerome Weiselberry. So welcome.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, Daisuke. I really appreciate the invitation.
No, thank you so much for coming to the channel and for being a guest. Thank you so much. The honor is all mine. I'm a big fan of your channel, and so it's very exciting for me to be able to talk with you in person directly like this. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to what we end up talking about.
Thank you so much. And so Jerome Weiselberry is the name of the YouTube channel, just in case people who might be watching this are meeting you for the first time. So
it's not my actual name.
I know
there's a lot of confusion from that.
Because that's a very interesting thing. So why don't we start with that, with the channel? So for anyone who might be interested or who is meeting you for the first time, could you let us know about your YouTube channel, Jerome Weiselberry, please?
Sure. I always just describe it as I'm a person who loves reading, loves books, and loves watching movies, and I talk about both. That is not what I originally started out to do. The whole thing began several years ago just because I had a long distance friend and I filmed a couple videos for her because I had a new webcam and I wanted to try it out, and I had some editing software, and the files were too big to just send through email, and I kept editing them to try to make them smaller. And rather than do what I suppose now in hindsight is the logical thing and send them via Google Drive or something like that, I said, how about I make a YouTube channel and upload them there? And so I did that. I set that up, hadn't had that before, but I didn't want to use my real name just on the off chance that somebody in the world saw these videos. I didn't think it was likely at all, but you never know, things happen. So at that time, I was doing a lot of short story writing, and I had a list of characters that I had come up with who didn't end up having a place in any of the stories. So I chose a name from that list. I chose this name, Jerome Weiselberry, because I thought it sounded silly, it was quirky, it was Dickensian, and I thought for sure everybody would know it's not a real name. I was mistaken, but I have never wanted to change it because once you have a name, it kind of sticks. And I do still want to maintain my privacy. I don't publish my name at all. So yeah, that's how that happened. I did change the spelling of it once for about 2 minutes. I changed the E and the I, but it didn't look right, even though it was a made up name. So I uploaded these videos, and then I did a couple book reviews, and I got a couple people watching. And then I did a 12 Days of a Christmas Carol series where I reviewed 12 versions of A Christmas Carol that we had at our house, 12 days in a row. And that was kind of the germination of something that's become a big part of my channel, where I talk about adaptations of classic literature onto film or for a television miniseries. Um, that was December of 2014. And then in 2015, I began doing the Jane Eyre reviews. And that is a project that I'm still working on. Um, uh, I do reviews of adaptations of all different kinds. And then within that series, I did another series of adaptation comparisons, taking scenes from the book and analyzing the self, and then how 9 different adaptations adapted or conveyed that scene onto film. And it's all very subjective, but I tried to really hone in on the details and leave it up to the viewer to decide which one do you think is the best. Here are the ones that I like the best, and so on. And then I don't remember what year it was exactly, but I decided to start talking about Godzilla movies. And then people really started watching. And I think it was because there was this strange dichotomy of content. There's Jane Eyre, and then there's Godzilla, and it's this bizarre mix. But that doing the Godzilla review series was like a gateway to talking more about classic science fiction films, monster movies, and now I kind of feel like I could talk about just about anything. Um, so my goal with the channel now, I'm not making videos just for a long distance friend anymore. The goal is to inform about movies that people either haven't heard of before or they haven't seen in a long time. And I want to encourage people to revisit them or check them out with a slightly different perspective. And I want to entertain. I do try to be enthusiastic, and I am always very clear that these are my personal opinions. I say at the end of just about every video, I think I say, these are my thoughts on this movie or this book, and what are yours? Because I'm very aware that my opinions are not going to be the same as everyone else's, and my videos are very subjective. And I'm learning more as I go and sharing that with my audience. I'm constantly expanding the horizons of what I'm willing to watch or what I'm interested in watching. And the viewers that I get, the recommendations, so many recommendations, they are a big part of that, of kind of steering me in one direction or another. And I've, in the last couple of years, started watching more Westerns and more foreign films, which are two areas that a lot of your viewers are more familiar with, but I don't have as much experience. For whatever reason, I don't know, but I've really started to develop more in those areas. Still, my favorite films tend to be the English language movies, but I think that's partially because I'm such a word person that the verbal element is important to me. I don't know how to describe it.
Oh,
But
that's fascinating. That's very fascinating. The focus on the verbal and the importance on this idea of the language as communication or other kind of signifier, I suppose. That's very
Mm-hmm.
interesting. There's so this is I will then if I will call you Jerome, if that's
Yep,
okay. Okay,
that's fine.
so I will so Jerome, and it's a great name, by the way. I must ask, as you brought it up in terms of literature and your focus and love on literature, what are some of those works of literature or authors or areas of literature in particular that you really enjoy? I know you mentioned Jane Eyre, and you mentioned Dickens, and
Hmm.
so I can maybe get a sense of that. But please, could you let us know of where your interests are in the world of literature?
That 19th century
Mm.
period is uh, very much where a lot of my focus lies, especially if I'm going to be reviewing something. Um, I've always been a fan of Dickens just because he's so quirky, and um, I feel like the amount of humor in Dickens' writing is underestimated. Um, I did a very dorky project on Charles Dickens when I was in 8th grade, and I tried to convey how funny I thought Charles Dickens was by reading an excerpt from the Pickwick Papers, and it didn't go very well. But when I talk about these things, I do try to uh, make them come alive for people who maybe aren't big readers. I talk about characters a lot so that people, I talk about books with people who maybe aren't reading frequently, and um, I I want to show that just because things are old doesn't mean that they're irrelevant or unrelatable. But yes, to get back to your question, Jane Eyre is one of my favorite novels. I still feel that way even after making 50 plus videos on the topic. I love the way the book is written and the story is told. I love the character. Um, she's someone who I do relate to. I sympathize with her struggles and I find her inspiring. I'm also a Jane Austen fan. I have done several reviews of adaptations of Pride and Prejudice. I was going to do more Jane Austen adaptation reviews, and I will. The the Jane Eyre adaptation comparison series kind of took over uh, and ousted that from my schedule, but I do have plans to do more of that. And I hesitate because I feel like, well, the review market is kind of saturated on that front, but um, I I find that people really have a hunger to hear more about these things, and to hear a new take and get a fresh look at something. Um, but my reading tastes vary about as much as my film tastes do. I read mysteries. I've got a pretty extensive collection of Agatha Christie books and Nio Marsh books and Rex Stout's Nero Wolfe detective novels. Um, I read some classic science fiction now and then. I really love Georgette Hayer's Regency romances for pure escapism. Um, I read the occasional nonfiction. I tend to like survival stories and war stories, um, which are often they often really bear witness to the phrase "truth is stranger than fiction." I find, so Yeah, I'm a little bit all over the place as far as books go, but I think the more someone reads a variety of things, the more well-rounded they can be. So I'm constantly trying new things.
Oh my goodness. I'm yes, I don't speak about literature as much as I would like to on my channel, but I also love reading very much. I believe in it strongly, and I'm a big admirer of Charles Dickens as well. So I have to ask, what are some of your notable favorites? I know you mentioned the Pickwick Papers, but are there is that and are there others as well that that are some of your favorites, by the way?
Pickwick Papers isn't so much a favorite. I really loved Bleak House when I read
Mm,
it a few years ago, and um,
yeah.
I also love I think it's 2005 miniseries adaptation of it. It's one of my favorite miniseries adaptations. There was also one from the 80s, which I thought was maybe not just as good, but was also an excellent adaptation. And I love A Tale of Two Cities, which I'm going to be reading again the second time in my life soon, sometime this year. I keep pushing it off because it's hard to find time to read, unfortunately. As much as I love reading, I often don't get to do it as much as I want. Um, but I I really love the diversity of Dickens's characters, personalities, um, and I love stories that carry you through a broad range of emotions. I've talked about how Dickens makes you laugh, but he can also make you cry. And those are the kinds of stories that stick with me most. The ones where I finish it and I feel like I felt everything. And that goes into how I choose a lot of my favorite movies as well. Ones that they had some real humorous moments, but they also deliver a gut punch. So I found that with Bleak House. I found that with The Tale of Two Cities. Um, Great Expectations, oddly, I don't love so much. And that's the one that they assign to kids in school, at least in the United States. And, it's iconic and it's it's it teaches great lessons, but I don't love it as much as other ones.
I'm no, it's what you've the ones that you do like as your favorites. Those are great. I look forward to the discuss. Have you talked about A Tale of Two Cities on your channel?
No, I did one video where I shared my 5 favorite Ronald Colman films,
Uh,
and I talked about the adaptation briefly in that, and I have talked about other adaptations in my What Else I Saw condensed movie review series, where I talk about these are all the movies that I didn't already review. I didn't do solo reviews of, and those reviews are about a minute to 2 minutes long. And I have talked about one or two other adaptations of A Tale of Two Cities there, but I have not done a a big thing about it. I've never focused on it. So I am looking forward to doing that. And I'm looking forward to reading it again. It's been many years, but I remember it. I've watched that 1935 version quite a bit. So
that oh, that's really wonderful, and it brings me to my next question too, which is the which you mentioned just now and you mentioned earlier, which is about adaptations. And of course, there are many modes of adaptations that we can see in terms of the approach to literature. And let's say modern entertainment or how we
Hmm.
consume media. That can be television, radio, and also cinema. And you also mentioned on your channel another tie between the literature, say, of Dickens as the example, and the adaptation, and how you approach it with the Christmas Carol, as you mentioned. So,
Hmm.
so this brings me to my question, which is, uh, so um, well, I'll get to my. I have a number of questions here, but before I forget, actually, because there's so many things I want to ask you, actually, which is the first of which is so you mentioned the types of adaptations, and you really like certain types of adaptations. Maybe there are some in particular that you really enjoy. What is it that you look for when you are trying to find a good adaptation? Or maybe to put it another way, what do you think are some of those characteristics of a good adaptation for you when you experience it?
Um, well, I don't want to be that person, but I do like an adaptation that sticks close to the book. There's, the readers who read a book before it becomes a movie, they almost always say the book was better. And a lot of the time that is the case, not always. Um, when it comes to uh, stories that I have seen a lot of adaptations of, like Jane Eyre or Pride and Prejudice or Dracula or The Phantom of the Opera, uh, the ones that I tend to like the most are longer, and they go more in depth, um, which really helps to flesh out the story and the characters. But I don't think that following the novel to a T is the most important thing. A film, because it's a visual medium, is going to have to change things, cut things out. And it also needs to be aesthetically pleasing. And that is the weakness of a lot of those really long miniseries that you get from the BBC in like the 70s or the 80s. I love the Jane Eyre adaptation from 1983 with Timothy Dalton and Zela Clark. But it is a little bit, it's a little dated, it's a little stiff, it's a little quiet. Um, so something that's more cinematic can speak to the viewer a little more, especially your average viewer who maybe isn't as well versed in the book. Um, but I found that it's it's a very hard combination to strike to make something that's a good movie but is also a good adaptation. And chances are you're not going to please all the people all the time. Um, uh, it's it's kind of a thankless job to, I think, to adapt a screenplay from a well-loved book in that sense.
I know you mentioned a few already, but what would be some examples for you of the really effective adaptations, TV, cinema, or otherwise?
um that were better than the book,
It's interesting. Maybe better,
or
however you want to interpret it. I'll
um
leave the question open ended and say what were
well,
effective for you.
um I don't know if this is a good example, because I read the book so much later. The Pianist, the 2002 film The Pianist, is one of my favorite movies. I love it. I love the soundtrack, I love the acting, I love the story. Years later, which was just a couple years ago, I read the book, which is uh, an autobiography of Vladislav Spielman, and I loved it. It was great, and I realized what a great adaptation the film was. Um, and it did make some adjustments, um, kind of played with some details a little bit, but in a way that enhanced the story. And I I found I was absolutely okay with everything that was done to adapt it for the film, to make a great movie. Um, but it was an equally good book. It was a good read. It was moving, very powerful story. Um, I think for films that are better than their source material, and this is kind of a controversial topic, Jaws. Uh, I think Jaws is much better. The film is much better than the book. The book I found disappointing because it just did not have that sense of adventure, and so much of the movie, I think, is about relationships, the relationships of the three men on the boat, and also the relationships of the main character, Chief Brody, at home, which is portrayed very differently in the book. It's much darker and less wholesome, I would say. So that is always the first one that comes to mind when people ask, so are there any adaptations where you're like, oh, it's much better? Another one I would say is, I don't remember the year, I think it's 2006 maybe, The Painted Veil, which is an adaptation of the W. Somerset Maugham book. Not the first adaptation, there's also one from 1932, I think. Maybe a little later than that, 34. But the later adaptation is a beautiful movie. It's got some gorgeous cinematography, a beautiful score. There's one track in particular, I believe the score was composed by Alexandre Desplat, and it changes the ending, at least as far as I remember it. I read the book and I did not care for it. I thought the characters were very unlikable, and to a certain extent, that's the point. But the film did more to redeem the characters in the viewer's eyes. And I like a good redemptive character arc, and I like to see development. I like to see people end up in a better place than they were when they started out. And so I liked the changes in that film. Uh, Someone who's a fan of the book probably wouldn't, but I can't speak for other people. But that's another example that often comes to my mind.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for that. It's, as I say, that's one of the great things about your channel, which is it has this wonderful focus on what it is that you love, and you have this great energy and enthusiasm for, and you're willing to share this with us, the viewers, in this way that I think is very welcoming and also very insightful. So I'm this is really great for me. I'm really excited by this, and it also brings me to another question which I wanted to ask, which is another thing that you are obviously very interested in is cinema, and so it leads me to the question, which is, I suppose, what were some of those maybe early landmark moments, milestone moments, maybe cinema viewing moments or cinema memories that that brought you along your own cinema journey, as I like to call it? What were some of those early moments for you, if you don't mind me asking?
It's funny, a lot of my earliest memories are of me being kept up at night because I watched a scary movie that just terrified me. A lot of those movies are ones I love now, which is a great irony. But um, I am the youngest of 5 kids, and there's a pretty big range between me and the eldest, 15 years, 6.5 years between me and my nearest sibling. So by the time I came along, people wanted to watch uh, films for older kids and adults. Um, and because we only had one TV and it's a small house, I'd be in the living room playing on the floor, and everybody else would be watching a movie. Um, my mom is a huge factor in my love of movies, especially my love of old movies, because uh, because she had all these kids. She wanted to have a safe, family friendly um, entertainment for them. And so, old movies, those are the safest way to go. You don't have to worry about any surprises. And classic musicals, these were all the things that she showed the kids. Of course, not so much by the time I came along. I missed the boat on a lot of the big family favorites. Um, but some of my earliest memories are of watching The Birds and The Blob, The Day the Earth Stood Still, a little bit later, The Tingler and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. I watched the 3 Creature from the Black Lagoon movies all in one night, and then I could not sleep at all. uh, which is funny now because that's my favorite Universal monster. Um, but I was prone to being afraid of everything when I was a kid anyway. Um, so it's this is not anything bad about my mom's choices. I was old enough and everything. I just, I carried those images with me to bed, and everything in the room, in the shadows, they just come alive and they assume the look of whatever it was I had watched. And even things that weren't scary per se made an impression on me. I remember um, the first time I watched Young Frankenstein, which is a comedy. It is blatantly a comedy, but there's this scene, I think it's the very first scene, where there's a coffin and a skeleton pops up, and I was so scared of that. And um we were a Star Trek family, and my brother is a huge fan of Star Trek 2. It's one of his favorites. And I remember cowering behind my mom's chair at the scene near the end. um I won't spoil it, I guess, but it's the from Hell's Heart I Stab at Thee scene. And I was so disturbed. I was a squeamish kid. I was an easily scared kid, and I didn't want to see that movie for years, which is a shame because when I finally did watch it as an adult, I realized what I'd been missing. It's a great movie. Um, so yes, those those are the formative memories, I guess. But at the same time, it wasn't all scary movies. Um, the 1995 miniseries adaptation of Pride and Prejudice came out around that time, and we saw it on TV, and we watched it again and again and again. And I was not really old enough to understand all of the concepts, but I understood enough of it. And with repetition, I understood it better. And then when I was 10, I read the book and understood more of it. And that's, I guess that could be where the whole love of film and the combination of film and literature started. Um, I think there are a couple examples that I could say that for. But yes, lots of genre films, disaster movies. The Towering Inferno was on a lot on TV, and I saw that many times, although never from start to finish. um, we we were really big fans here of Independence Day. There was a stretch where we were watching it every day, and I still love it. Um, I one of my favorite movies, Arsenic and Old Lace. Um, I all of us in this family love that movie. We can quote the movie. We imitate the movie. Um, what I didn't realize as a kid was that these were not movies that everybody else was watching. And I went to school and people would ask, "Oh, what are your favorite movies?" And I was okay if I said, "Oh, I love Sleeping Beauty and I love The Lion King. Those are my favorite animated films." And I love the live action version of 101 Dalmatians. That was my favorite movie for a while. Um, but then if I said, and also Arsenic and Old Lace and The Great Escape and Pride and Prejudice, they would have no idea what I was talking about, which was kind of put a damper on my enthusiasm for talking about these things for a while, which is too bad. I It's not that I stopped watching them, but I just didn't want to talk about them because it's a deterrent when nobody can relate to you, and you feel like, am I weird for liking these things? And you feel a little bit ostracized because everybody else is talking about whatever the latest movie is that's just come out in theaters, and you don't know anything about it, or something that came out even 5 years ago and you've never seen it, and you don't really have any interest in seeing it because you're perfectly happy with all these other old movies. um, but I got over that eventually, and I suppose that is um, part of why I enjoy talking about movies on YouTube so much, is because I know what it's like to enjoy these films privately and not have anyone to discuss them with. And so I want to start the discussion, I suppose, and find, are there other people out there who like this movie and what are their thoughts on it? um, and it's okay to be a bit of an oddball and to like movies that the majority of people aren't talking about anymore. um, but that's all. Those are my childhood memories. Do you want me to go on to talk about my teenage years?
Oh, please, yes. Oh,
Okay. um
yes, please, yeah.
I I guess I kind of got away from watching old movies so much for a while there. And then when I was in high school, we started going to the library every week and we would rent movies because it was free. That's great. And they had a surprisingly large selection. So um, I don't know how it started, but it became the norm for us to get a couple of old movies and a BBC miniseries adaptation of something. And so I just kind of became inundated with these films. And I started to develop a new appreciation for black and white photography and that classic style, which is just so much a part of films then that you don't see very often now. I think there are some films that come out these days that try to emulate that, and is close but not quite. Um, and I began to learn who the actors were and recognize them in other things. I developed favorite actors and directors. And because of the adaptations we were watching of things, which I had read and maybe not read, um, I got a deeper interest in that, which led me to do a project where I tried to adapt a screenplay from a book. And that was an assignment in school. We had a senior project. We had to pick something we wanted to create, and that was what I did. And so I read a lot of books about screenplays and screenwriting, both writing original screenplays and adapting them. And uh, I ultimately decided this isn't for me, but I learned a lot from that. And that's something that made me look at films differently. And I really appreciate the mini series as the ideal format. Um, but it wasn't all movies, all old movies that I saw at that time. There were other newer movies mixed in, and a couple that really stick out to me are Pan's Labyrinth, um, and this other movie that's not talked about a whole lot called The Fall. And they are two movies that have just jaw-dropping cinematography. The coloring is so unique, and not exactly realistic, but it reflects how both films, mix fantasy and reality. And that's something I was fascinated by. Um, but I think something that really changed how I viewed film was when I went to college and I took a film and theater survey class, um, which in a way, I went into it feeling like this is kind of superfluous, because a lot of the movies that we talked about I was already familiar with. And I don't say that to pat myself on the back, but because of the things that I had watched, and we'd spent many hours watching Turner Classic Movies on television, I was familiar with quite a few things. Um, but I started to learn the names of different filming techniques and um, technical terms for photography and all these little details. The kind of the turning point though was, this is going to sound so cliche, but we did a screening in class of Citizen Kane, which at the time was still named the best film of all, greatest film of all time. And I had seen it before. That was my second time watching it. But this was suddenly so much more exciting because I had someone kind of acting as a guide and pointing out, um, here's how this shot was filmed, here's what makes this sequence unique. And I remember sitting there watching it and looking around at everybody else and being like, are they seeing this the same way that I'm seeing it? Because this is amazing. Like I'm watching a movie differently than I've really ever watched one before. Not that I was ever someone who just casually watched movies. I've always been, very focused on the whole picture, but this was like, opening my mind up to really seeing and listening and focusing on what's going on in the entire frame, and what's going on in the background, and uh, what is this character doing. And it was such an experience, and it I think that has carried through a lot in how I view movies now. And over the years, I've realized what I like and developed my own taste, and tried to watch movies intently and thoughtfully. Um, and I do feel like there's still a ways to go. I have not learned everything. I feel like as many movies as I've seen, I've barely scratched the surface, but um I I suppose even doing the Godzilla series, which is a relatively recent thing, there were some movies there that going into it, I had very low expectations of. Let's be honest. Not all of those movies are winners, but I tried to go into them optimistically and to treat them equally, um, because I don't think it's I don't think it's entirely fair to say, oh well, this is just a silly monster movie, so I'm going to disregard. I'm not going to take it as seriously, because you if you go into it with that attitude, you can miss little things, and um it doesn't serve anything to be dismissive or derisive about something. um and that kind of also shaped how I talk about movies, how I look at movies, um to be more accepting, or um to just approach everything with equal interest. uh yeah, I guess that answers your question.
That was spectacular. Um, how do I even begin to respond? Because there's so many great things there. I was, as I was listening, I was following the train of thought that you were very, very kindly sharing with us, and I was just amazed at how you were going from, for example, I don't know, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers or Creature from the Black Lagoon, to Pride and Prejudice, to Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, to I think 101 Dalmatians. That's with Glenn
Yeah,
Close's
that
Cruella de Vil,
yes,
right?
that,
Yeah,
that
I
that
love
was
that. Yeah,
my
uh,
favorite movie for the longest time when I was a kid. I haven't
that's
seen it in years. I don't know if it's any good anymore.
that's a great. Oh, it's I think it's great. Yeah, it's very fun. There's a certain liveliness, and then you went from and then you spoke about um, Pride and Prejudice, Arsenic and Old Lace, and Independence Day. So Independence Day, Bill Pullman, right,
Hmm.
as the president, right?
Yep,
Yeah, I saw that in
yep.
the theater. Yeah, twice. I saw
My
that twice in the
I
theater,
think
actually. Yeah.
I think both of my brothers saw it in the theater multiple times, and they came home and they were talking about it. And I know now it's not considered a great movie and all that, but I don't care. I still love it. And I suppose a lot of the things that I watched were governed by what my mom was interested in. And she had certain actors that she really liked a lot, and Bill Pullman was one of them.
Yeah.
So there were two movies, Independence Day and While You Were Sleeping,
Hmm.
with Sandra Bullock, that we watched regularly.
Yes, this was where, yeah, Sandra Bullock was I think, one of the most uh, popular actresses, right, during this tier. While You're
Hmm.
Sleeping, this is what was it, Speed as well
Yep,
around this time. Yes,
yep.
with and
And my mom was also a Keanu Reeves fan, and that was before I mean, he's huge now.
yes,
It's amazing.
yes. That's great. Pop Quiz Hot Shot, right?
Hmm.
And Dennis Hopper. Yeah, that's a great movie.
Yep.
And then and what blew my mind was you mentioned that, and then you said, which was so amazing to me, and then I went to high school. So I thought, my goodness, this journey that you were speaking of, this was before high school, which is and then you talk about the high school experience. And I don't want to take the focus off of the great conversation, but what you were speaking of reminds me of something that happened to me when I was in high school, which was, do you know the film Psycho? You mentioned
Yep.
the birds, but the Alfred
Yes.
Hitchcock film
Hmm.
Psycho. And I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but when I was in high school, I was in the United States at the time, and I was taking high school English, and I forget the exact year, but uh, in high school English, at some point, one probably reads like The Scarlet Letter, or
Hmm.
um, Jane Austen comes to mind, and also Edith Wharton and
Hmm.
Ethan Frome. And so
Yep.
I read
I read
Ethan
that in high
Frome.
school too.
Yeah, yeah, and so we had a little project at the end of Ethan Frome. You could talk about it, and so I decided to write an essay comparing some things and aspects of Ethan Frome, the novel, with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, because I was very taken, the famous words, droning querulously, from
Hmm.
Ethan Frome, and I thought that this was something that I could attribute to the depiction of a character in Psycho called Mrs. Bates. And so I decided, as part of the project, because I thought in my mind, as I was in high school, I thought everyone knows Psycho, because I knew Psycho when I was a kid growing up, but
Right.
I just knew about it. I'd never felt any time in my life where I didn't know it. So I knew what it was. I knew the ending. So I thought in my mind, in my naive mind, I thought everyone knows Psycho. So one day, as part of my project, I said, okay, these are the ways I think Ethan Frome is similar to Psycho, or something like that. And part of that was showing clips of
Oh
the film
no.
Psycho. So what I did was I had a VHS tape of Psycho, and I just brought it in, and I had permission. So, okay, you can show it. And so I showed like the scary moment, the climax
Right.
moments. And I thought, oh, everyone knows Psycho, but I showed it, and I remember there's one other student there, and she started to cry, and
Oh
and I
no.
thought, oh, I felt so bad, because I realized suddenly that, oh my goodness, this is so important, because right, not everyone knows the film Psycho. And so I was thinking that, as you were talking about your story about how some people might not necessarily in high school know the films that you were watching at the time,
Right.
but yeah, it that was a real eye opener for me, and I realized, yeah, probably not everyone has seen Psycho, so I should be careful going forward.
Oh, yikes. Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah, I felt bad. I really felt bad. Yeah, but yeah, I guess it never it helped me to remember, even after all those years have passed, that little moment about Ethan Frome and droning querulously, I suppose. Yeah.
That's such an interesting connection to make. I never would have thought of that, to tie Ethan Frome and Psycho
Yeah,
together.
yeah, I don't know, but yeah, really, I was, I was really into cinema in high
Oh,
school.
I'm all for that. I'm
Yeah,
all for making bizarre connections that somehow work.
I was fascinated. You mentioned Star Trek, and maybe one of your siblings in particular is a big Star Trek fan. I'm a
Hmm.
huge, I love Star Trek, in particular the original series. And around that time, the film Star Trek Six: The
Hmm.
Undiscovered Country came out, and you are, of course, well versed in literature and Shakespeare, so you probably know the reference to
Yep.
Shakespeare already, and Hamlet. And so but that is filled with so many references to Shakespeare. And I remember in my English class, we had to write journals, and I was just writing pages and pages about Shakespeare and Star Trek Six. I was loving it. It was just, that
Oh,
was, yeah, that
it's
was,
it's I love how smart those movies are.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's not, let's not water down
Uh,
things and try to just keep it simple. No, let's infuse it with these great literary references. Oh, it really elevates the film to a whole other level.
yeah,
It's great stuff.
yeah. Yeah, so I agree so much with that sentiment, my friend. And people can come to the film in any way that he or she wants, and
Right.
right.
It's
So
accessible.
yeah,
If you don't know those references at that point in your life, that's okay. That's it's like a little kernel for you to pick up later on, perhaps when you are more familiar with literary references, or maybe you say, this is a reference, I don't really understand what it's a reference to, and so that leads you to check out that work. We talked about A Tale of Two Cities, references to A Tale of Two Cities in Star Trek 2, which I just ate up. I had, at the time that I first watched that for real, not from hiding behind my mom's chair, that just blew my mind. I had no idea that the movie would do that, would be so, it's just so clever. Yeah, really just tickles your brain.
oh, I like how you phrased that. There's many levels. I completely agree. And I must ask also before we move on. So you had mentioned that you were in, what was it, your senior year, endeavoring to, as part of a project,
Mm-hmm.
adapt something in terms of, do you remember the work in particular?
I do. I mentioned Georgette Hare earlier. Uh, I attempted to adapt one of her novels, called Devil's Cub, which is a Georgian swashbuckler romantic comedy. It's very light. Um, and I think I chose it on purpose because I didn't want to choose anything that was too heavy or too mired in history. It's a historical romance, but it's not like War and Peace where it deals with this huge battle or anything. It's just, kind of a fluffy comedy. Um, I do tend, I love the book, but I do tend to downplay it a little bit because, it's not a great work of literature. Um, in my research, I found out that um, a couple films had been made based on her books, and she disliked them, especially one, so much that she stipulated in her will that the rights would never be given to anyone to adapt any more of her books, which I think is a shame. But as someone who's dabbled at writing, I totally understand. You The writer does give up something when they say, yes, you can make a movie of my book. It could turn out great, it could turn out not so great, and you could be really disappointed in the product. Um, but yes, I adapted a screenplay for that. It was much too long because I just couldn't help myself. I think I was too close to the book. There were just all these little bits that I wanted to include, and so as an adaptation, uh, in my personal opinion, it was a failure because it the the depth of the book just doesn't merit a 4-hour adaptation. And that's probably what it would have ended up being if anybody made it, and that just doesn't make sense.
Oh, that reminds me what you were talking about earlier in the conversation about some of what you see, or what are those kinds of adaptations that you really like. You mentioned the balance between trying to stick with the source material, but also making changes where necessary. So that seems like that was something that was with you when you were trying to
Yeah,
implement that in practice, as it
it
were,
was
right?
terrible. It was a fun project, but I was not good at it. I just did not want to change anything, didn't want to add too much. Um, but it was a good learning experience. I have great sympathy for screenwriters, especially who are adapting something, and a great appreciation for what they're able to do. When you watch a movie that's under 2 hours and it's adapted from a book, a full length book of 250 pages plus, especially if it's even longer, there's been a lot of work put into that. It's pretty amazing.
This is great because it leads me to another question very nicely, which is you also mentioned as part of the inspiration for the name, the great name, Jerome Weiselberry. You had mentioned that this was a name of one of the characters that you had in a short story that you had
Or he
written.
didn't make it into a short
Oh,
story.
okay. Thank you. Thank you. So this was a character that you had planned to have at some
Mm-hmm.
stage, but it wasn't included. Thank you very much for the correction. But in any event, it was a product or it was somehow a creation of yours in terms of your work as a writer and in your endeavors in creative writing and fiction. And so the and you now also mention how your experiences with the screenwriting adaptation process also enabled you in an interesting way to view or appreciate many maybe the creative aspect of a work that you are reading or watching or experiencing. So could I ask you, as with your experiences in writing and creative writing, do you see that in any way affecting your perspective on the books that you read or the films that you watch? In other words, it would seem to me that, unlike me, I'm not an artist and I'm not a writer or anything, but so unlike me, someone in my position, someone in your position would seem to have a closer understanding as to the types of creative choices that are necessary, the types of creative sacrifices necessary, shall we say? I mean, you mentioned the character Jerome Weiselberry, but who ended up not being part of it. So
Right.
that's part of a decision. You create
Mm-hmm.
something, but it's a part of decision. Like it's an edit, something that, what's the oft used phrase, something that's left on the cutting room floor in
Mm-hmm.
the context of cinema. So does that in any way affect or help your perspective when you are viewing a film or reading a book or work of literature or otherwise experiencing a work of creative art?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Um, as someone who likes to write, and I bring that into my filming, um, I love words, and so when I'm reading, it's not just reading the words on the page. There's an element of just really a well-written book has a plumminess to it. There's a richness to the descriptions, and um, my favorite writing inspires you to just pause and um, absorb the words, and you want to speak them out loud. Um, but when it comes to films, I find myself more and more focusing on characters, character development, character arcs, characters' relationships with each other of whatever kind. They don't necessarily have to be romantic. I really enjoy parent-child relationships for some reason. Um, and I I feel like I often am trying to detect if there's something that could have been included that would make something clearer. Um, it's it's hard to imagine what's not there, but if it feels like there's something missing, I try to figure out, like, how might this have been fleshed out more. Um, Absolutely. Being someone who reads a lot and has has tried to navigate storytelling myself. I do pay attention to those things in a film. Is it following a logical structure? I try not to obsess over that kind of thing too much. Like, okay, does this have the basic 3-act structure? At what point is the rising action and the climax and all that? I don't like to be too technical or analytical because I do watch movies just for fun. I watch them for entertainment, but I can't help being a little bit analytical. And I think at this point, I've spent so much time picking up all these little things along the way that it just comes naturally to me to, I'll be watching a movie and there's a point where things have been building to something, and then there's a big moment, and then there's a stillness, and I automatically look at, what's the runtime, what's the runtime, and how far into the film are we, and then I know, okay, that's the end of the first act or something, which probably is not something that your average person is paying attention to. And I don't think it's something that you necessarily should obsess over to the point that you miss out on other things in the film, but it can help you understand the storytelling better, or just appreciate how the film is structured.
Oh, though that, thank you so much for that perspective, because as you say, it can help one to appreciate various facets of the layering. And and it's because, as we know, it's a very multi-leveled approach, especially the creation of something like cinema, which is actually a very complex mode of creation, I would dare think. So that is, I think, really helpful, and it is it brings me also to the maybe the next question, which is your film journey or cinema journey, where you find yourself in your life right now. And you were very kind to share with us some memories of your childhood and your family and the influences there, and then growing up in school, high school, and then university. And then now, of course, you are still obviously very engaged in your own cinema journeys. So uh, maybe bringing us to the present, could you continue on with some examples of your film journey that bring you to the point that you are at right now in terms of being an enthusiast for cinema and the arts?
I I feel almost overwhelmed at times by how many movies are out there that I haven't gotten to watch yet. Um, and so I I feel like I'm keeping busy to watch things as much as I can. Um, I I have branched out quite a bit, and not as much as I could. I'm trying to push myself to watch more things. I'm always trying to encourage myself to watch more silent films and more foreign films. Um, and I do um, I do choose what I watch partially based on what I'm planning to review, obviously. I watch before I review anything, I do watch it a couple of times, and I um I like to juggle the topics that I cover. If I've just talked about a big monster movie, chances are the next thing I talk about is going to be an old classic or a costume drama or something of that nature. So what I am hoping to talk about does dictate what I watch. I've also Turner Classic Movies has a streaming app, Watch TCM, and I will check there pretty regularly to see what they've added. And if they've added a movie that I've wanted to see for a long time, well, we know what we're going to be watching in the next week or two. And that has led me to watch some things that I had not expected, that I hadn't heard of. Yeah, I one of the most two of the most interesting things last year that came along, two movies that I'm still thinking about, are first For a Few Dollars More, which is number 2 in the Sergio Leone Dollars trilogy. And it was kind of funny how we watched them, because I had seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly a while ago and really enjoyed it. And that was at a time when I was like, I don't like Westerns, they're not for me. And that was part of what changed my mind about that. And then last year we watched A Fistful of Dollars. Both films, A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More, were on Amazon Prime. We watched the first one. They were both going to be expiring soon. And I said, the second one's on there. Would you guys want to watch it, to my parents? And they said, okay, let's watch it the very next night. And I am aware that there's a little controversy related to A Fistful of Dollars, because it is essentially the same movie as Yojimbo, the Kurosawa film. And I saw that just a couple months later. I saw Yojimbo and Senjuro. But, I don't feel like there needs to be a fight over which one's better. I enjoyed both pretty much equally. But For a Few Dollars More, I liked even better for some reason. The last 15 minutes of the movie has just stuck with me. And that's so bizarre to me, because I don't think of myself as a Westerns fan. And it is so classic Western, but the music in that whole sequence, the final duel, I don't think that's a spoiler to say it's a final duel, because all of those movies end with a final duel. It is just, it's so part of the story, that theme, and the trumpets are going, and it's this turning point. It's a revelation. It's got, the two main characters, Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name, and Lee Van Cleef's character, I can't remember, Colonel Mortimer, I think it is. They have had this interesting relationship, and to see Lee Van Cleef playing a good guy is shocking, and I loved it. And the playful exchanges between them are so good, and then the way things work out in that final sequence was just, it just really got me. And so here I'm a year later, I still think about it. And another experience that I'm still thinking about, and I wouldn't necessarily say this is a favorite film, although I know it's a favorite film of many. Late summer, we watched Picnic at Hanging Rock. And there are movies that get described as haunting, but that one really is the embodiment of the word haunting to me. There has not been a week that's gone by since then that I haven't thought about it and reflected and tried to figure it out. And um, the imagery, the sound design is just so, it just reverberates in your skull. And it was unlike anything I had ever seen. So that is something that is just really sticking with me. And you know, I only saw it the once. I very likely I'll see it again. Um, yeah, a powerful movie indeed.
Oh my goodness. That is, I'm again, you keep doing it. My mind is blown. It's, this is, I love that film. I love those films. I'm so glad that you had that reaction that you did to Picnic at Hanging Rock. You're right. That is a far out movie.
Yes.
Right? It's,
Yes.
I don't want to, right? If anyone hasn't seen it, please see it, but it has like, it's like a mystery. It's like an ethereal
It's
fantasy horror. It's like there's moments where
yeah.
it's like giallo, I don't know, like Italian giallo horror film music
Yeah.
vibe. Yeah.
My mom and I watched it, and I remember we looked at each other and we're like, so what even happened? And then we had this great discussion about it afterward. And I love it when you watch a movie and you're like, I need to talk about this, and just, what did you think happened, and what about this, and well, what's going to happen next? And oh yeah, there was so much to unpack there.
And talk about adaptations. Yeah, that's another great example. I think you're speaking of adaptations earlier. That's yeah, I love that film. So I'm so happy to hear you mention that. Yeah. Have you spoken about this on your channel?
I did a mini review of Picnic at Hanging Rock as part of the What Else I Saw series. Same with For a Few Dollars More. And I don't ever say like, oh, this is a new favorite movie or whatever, but because I don't necessarily know at the time. When I watch a movie that I've never seen before, I don't really have the gut feeling that like, oh, this is a new favorite. It kind of has to, time has to pass, and I have to let it marinate a little bit. And then I feel like I can add it to my list, my ever growing list. And but I think when you watch those videos, you can kind of tell. I think you can kind of infer like, you really liked this one. You talked about this movie 3 times as long as you talked about the other ones. And I think my language kind of reflects how I felt um, about the certain film.
Uh, that's great, and it also brings me to bringing me almost full circle to your YouTube channel, because like your own cinematic tastes and tastes in literature and the arts, I think you very excellently cover many different topics that are still your own. I must applaud you, for example, on your recent video on the Poseidon Adventure. And it was a great analysis, and I love the film very much. But in particular, you in your comments, you had mentioned also, you were talking about Irwin Allen, right? Irwin Allen, who's of course a very influential voice with the Poseidon Adventure, Towering
Yes.
Inferno. But you mentioned also in that discussion When Time Ran Out, the film When Time Ran Out.
Yes.
Yes, and that hardly anyone mentions that one. But I was so happy that you mentioned, actually. This is a complete coincidence, but actually I have, yes, it's right here. When Time Ran Out.
Which
Yes.
I should clarify, I have
Yes.
not seen it. I've only seen a couple minutes of it.
Oh, but it's good that you mention it, because it's very part of the career trajectory of
Yeah.
Irwin Allen, that kind of with this period in the 70s began with the Poseidon Adventure and kind of ended
Yeah, really
with
petered out.
yeah, with when time ran out. But this is a really interesting. If you like the Towering Inferno, you mentioned you saw it many
Mhm.
times. This has, of course, Paul Newman and William Holden, as well as many others. So it also has Red Buttons, and also Ernest Borgnine and Red Buttons are in this film. So, but I thought that was a great video, one of many great videos on your channel. And part of those videos on your channel, by the way, are also the Godzilla films. And I must ask you, what are some of your favorites? I know you said some of them are, and I
Well,
completely understand that. Yeah, but what are some of the ones that really surprised you or really entertained you in particular?
um, I really loved the last Heisei film, Godzilla versus Destoroyah. Um, it all of it. Um, I mean, it's the final part of a trilogy within this set of six, and I was not prepared for how emotional it would be. That whole ending, wow. Um, the music, I just loved it. I've done a couple videos now on the music of the Godzilla films, and I think that's my favorite soundtrack. Um, it just because the introductory parts when Burning Godzilla shows up, and I had heard about Burning Godzilla before I saw that movie, but I didn't really know what it meant, what it would look like, and then getting to see it finally was like, this is it. This is the iconic thing that Godzilla fans talk about. Um, and but I was also amazed that like it's really good as a horror movie too. The main antagonist, this thing that changes its form so many times, and every form is grotesque and seems more intelligent than some of the other opponents. And um, there were some moments there that I was like, oh, this is really spooky. um, Definitely, that was a great movie. I also really liked uh, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla and Terror of Mechagodzilla. They're two very different movies, but I kind of lump them together because it's a two-part story. And I couldn't say which one I like better, um, because the mood is quite different. Terror of Mechagodzilla is a somber film, and uh, it's got this interesting emphasis on uh, humanity, and I can't really talk about that because that's a spoiler, but you know what I'm talking about with the main girl and her relationship with her father, and um this whole element that I was not expecting. But Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, the introduction of yet another iconic character to the franchise, so iconic that the character's been introduced again and again. And that scene where he transforms and you see how oh, such a good moment. And both films have one of my favorite actors from the franchise, Akihito Hirata. And that was another thing that I loved about watching those movies, was getting introduced to these actors who I'd never heard of before. I hadn't seen in anything else, and I came to have my favorites. So that when they showed up again, and they usually did, it was like there's so and so again. And that is something that I love about watching movies, is recognizing the actors. They become like friends or even family. and it's a joy to see them again, whether they're playing a good guy or a bad guy. And I realize that's probably not something that a lot of people focus on when they watch the movies. They're there for the monsters, they're there for the fights, but I was there for that, but I was also there for the human storylines and the characters and the actors and the music. Um, I, I can't stress enough that there's a lot more to those movies than meets the eye. You're muted.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so terrible with technology, but thank you very. So this is I was muted because as you were speaking, I was just like everything. I was like, yes, yeah, yes, exactly. So I'm glad I was muted because otherwise I would have just been interrupting you. But because I was saying that because I was agreeing with everything that you were saying. 1000% I was in agreement with you. And I'm you mentioned earlier about how you really like, for example, relationships, and you mentioned human relationships, in particular parents and children, those familial bonds. And if
Yes.
you're talking about Terror of Mechagodzilla, I think you're very right to point out those possibilities. Let me end there.
Yes.
And my goodness, and Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, that could be my favorite Godzilla film, or it's up there anyway. I love that film so much. I saw that so many times as a kid. I just love that. And the scene you mentioned, yes, I was just, yes, when you were speaking, I was just going like this. And the music too, you're absolutely right. And could you let us know, for those who don't know, so you said you spoke about the soundtracks, those CD soundtracks. Could you
Mm-hmm.
tell us a little bit about that?
It's a 2-disc set. I got them separately. Um, called The Best of Godzilla. One focuses on the music of the Showa era, and the other, which is the one I got first, focuses on the music of the Heisei era. And it's not complete. It's more, key parts from the scores. And there are also some of the songs that are sung in the films, like Mothra's song and Sacred Springs. Oh, I love that one. Um, uh, but it's like a little sample of music from almost every movie. Not the Millennium. I don't think they'll ever make one for the Millennium. I think there are CDs, other sets you can get that have Millennium music, but these came out in the late 90s, around the time of the Roland Emmerich film, which not not everybody likes that one in the Godzilla discussion, but this was kind of like a, hey, everybody's into Godzilla right now, so let's make these CDs. It's really a great way to acquaint yourself with the music if you aren't so familiar. If you're like, oh, I've watched some Godzilla movies, but the music didn't stand out to me. This is music that you can listen to separately. It does what music for films should, brings a mood or a certain scene even to mind, but it's just good music too.
So thank you so much and we can find those videos and many others on your channel.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and also before we go to the next question, I'm so glad you mentioned the actor Hirata. Yes, a man of 1,000 faces, truly, in terms of the range of characters that he's portrayed
Mm-hmm.
within the universe of Godzilla alone, even
Yes.
from Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla to Terror of Mechagodzilla, the jump of character range and the mustache, and everything.
Right. Yeah.
It's amazing. Yes, I'm so glad you mentioned him. Yeah, you're well done, well done. You are looking at these from various perspectives, and that is absolutely fantastic, my friend. Really
Thank you.
is. And you spoke about these in this wonderful series that is part of your YouTube channel, and it's, as you mentioned, it was something that you I mean, you wanted to do, and so that was again another opportunity for people like me to engage with your commentary and with your experiences and perspective. And the enthusiasm was really very delightful and very enlightening for me. And just in case people don't know, it made me want to speak about your channel. And so you very kindly, maybe a year or so ago, you
Mhm.
very kindly gave me permission to speak a little bit about your wonderful channel. And so I want to thank you very much for giving me that permission.
Oh,
And
it was an honor, and I when I saw the video, I couldn't believe it. Like, wow, you didn't just mention my channel. Like, you so complimentary. I was truly honored and blessed by that. And my mom loved it. My mom loves to hear praise of her children. So she's watched it multiple times.
oh, thank you. No, well, no. It's all due to your great efforts. And so, uh, and I'm just I'm now I'm sitting here and I'm still trying, and I mean this 100% complimentary. I'm still trying to process in my head this conversation, because it's wonderful, but because you go so enthusiastically in so many ways and so many avenues, which I think is a wonderful almost expression of the type of approach that you share with us on your channel. And so I really want to just stress once again just how valuable I think, and many other people think your channel is. And so, thank you so much for your efforts there. So much about your channel. I should ask: is there any kind of process that you undergo in terms of what you decide to talk about next, or is it more how you feel in the given moment? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
What is, can you give us a little bit of insight into that decision-making process for anyone who might
sure.
not know?
It's it's a little bit of both. I do choose what I want to watch or read based on my mood. Um, I have a long list of things I'd like to talk about sometime, and I might glance through that list and feel like I don't feel like rewatching any of these movies right now. Um, but I do try to shuffle my topics because I want to keep everybody interested. I know very well that some videos perform better than others, and I want to stay consistent. Um, I am known for a lot of different topics, and so I want to keep those changing. But I do also choose things, based on mood, and if it doesn't happen very often that I watch a movie that I hadn't been intending to do a solo review of, but it does happen sometimes where you have so many thoughts on it, and it's more than you could talk about in just a 1 minute discussion as part of here's the whole month of videos of movies. um but I will say the videos almost always end up being longer than I anticipated because um I start I watch the movie usually with my mom or with my parents, and then I go through it again and I get my screenshots, and if I'm going to use any film clips, which I do very cautiously, um, I do that, and I'll make more observations. I'll pick up on things that I might not have seen just watching the movie. And I do take notes as I watch the movie the first time around. Um, but then there are more things I see, and then I compile all these thoughts together and come up with a script. I hope that's not an earth-shattering revelation to anyone watching this who watches my videos. Yes, they are scripted for the most part. I do go off script at least once every video. You can play a fun game and try to figure out where did you go off script in this one. But I spend hours trying to make the whole thing follow a logical and cohesive train of thought. And then once I feel ready, or once my deadline comes for film, when I can film, I film and do the whole editing process and then send it out into the world and hope that there will be people who are as interested in that topic at that moment as I was.
So this gets to my next question, which is, without necessarily giving away too many of the secrets, because that's part of the fun, which is the surprise. But are there any projects down the line that you are considering that you could be willing to share a little bit with us about?
um
Or
let's
is it
see.
still pretty much, I don't mind either way, but
Well, I do plan to talk about A Tale of Two Cities at
mhm.
some point. Um, I I reviewed The War of the Worlds earlier this year. I reviewed the book and then the old film. And in both of those comment sections, people talked about this musical version from the 80s, which I had never heard of. I guess it's a British thing. So I will be checking that out. Um, I I do plan to review the Towering Inferno and then the airport movies. I don't plan to do a huge disaster movie thing. I that's too many movies. I could just become a disaster movie channel if I do that. But I've seen 3 out of 4 airport movies, but it's been a long time, and I would like to, put the spotlight on those for a little while. Um, and I know that they vary in quality, but the casts are great, and it's a period in time. It's so 70s. So that's something I've had planned for a long time. And when I finally reviewed the Poseidon Adventure last month, I think it was, I feel like, okay, this is finally happening. So those are some things I have planned. I don't like to divulge my plans too much or to be too open with my schedule, because I find that as soon as I share something like, oh, I'm going to be doing this in 2 weeks, something happens and changes the plan. I have to cancel that. I have to do something else. And it's like, oh, oops, disappointed people.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm so honored that you could share that. And I too am a big fan of disaster films and the airport films. And so I'm looking forward to that immensely, and also a big fan of the Towering Inferno as well. So I'm looking forward to that so much. And so Jerome Weiselberry, I really want to thank you so much for giving some of your very precious time today, and
Absolutely.
be willing to share with us a little bit about who you are and your own journey, in terms of cinema journey and literature journey and your arts journey and your journey. So and I know that we're running a little bit short on time, but maybe we can do this again and pick up where we left off, if
Oh,
that's okay
maybe.
with you.
I
Would that be
I'll be
okay?
honest, I was very nervous going into this because I've never done anything like this before, and so very unusual for me. But I I feel like it's gone well. I've really enjoyed talking to you and sharing, dropping titles and seeing your reaction. That has been really fun. So yeah, I'd love to do it again sometime.
I really want to just emphasize again, I'm very honored. Really, I'm very honored that you would be willing to sit down with me like this. I enjoyed myself immensely. So if it's okay, I'd love to do this again, part
Sure.
two. The what is it? Uh, yes, so Poseidon Adventure and Beyond the Poseidon Adventure. I don't know, but no, part two, or yeah. So let's do part two. I'm sorry, forget that. Yeah, so part two. So let's do part two very soon if that's okay.
Sure.
I'm really honored. Before we go, though, could you just, if you have any, do you have any film recommendations or anything that you think people should check out? Something that you're really keen on at the moment?
Um, well, I'm thinking back over this, all that we've talked about, and we've talked about a lot of movies, and there are some favorites of mine that I didn't mention at all. So I'll drop those. I love The Third Man. It's absolutely one of my top five favorite movies ever. And my two favorite Hitchcock films are Shadow of a Doubt, also starring Joseph Cotton. I'm a fan of his. And Rear Window. I refer to them as my favorite black and white Hitchcock and my favorite color Hitchcock. And I figure most classic film fans have seen those, but if they haven't, they absolutely should check them out. Um, and they all have those factors that I love, a quirkiness, a little bit of dark humor, but also some really gripping material. Um, Last year, I saw a couple films that I thought were really good that not many people talked about, and they were newer. I saw a movie called Arctic, starring Mads Mikkelsen, where he plays a man who has survived a plane crash in the Arctic, and he's doing what he can to survive and hoping that someone will hear his distress signals, and something happens that makes makes him have to he has to decide if he's going to stay where he is or if he's going to make the trek to the nearest station. And I thought it was a great movie. It just kind of snuck out there into the world, and we just happened to find it streaming on Amazon Prime, and it was a great understated performance. I love survival movies, a lot about endurance and sacrifice, and it's always impressive to see one person carrying the bulk of a movie. And the other one that I really loved was a film called The Vast of Night. It was kind of an independent film, I think, but again, Amazon Prime picked it up, and they released it for wide release, which it hadn't gotten before, in June or July, I think it was, of last year. And it is a little time period piece, a pretty low budget, modestly budgeted film about these two kids in their teens. One's a DJ at a radio station in, this is the late 50s, and the girl is a kind of a fill-in switchboard operator. And on this one night, they're doing their jobs, and they hear this strange frequency coming in over the radio. And then people start calling in, talking about something they've seen in the sky. And you kind of have an idea of where it might be going, but you're not sure. And it's this really eerie film, that spends a lot of time developing the characters. There are these long stretches where it's just the two characters talking, and they are so likable. The two young adults who are playing these roles are just immediately engaging, and their conversation pulls you in. They're funny, they're smart, and there are these sequences where they're just walking down the road at night, and this town seems abandoned because everybody, it's a small town and everybody's at a basketball game at the high school, and the camera is just following them down this dark road. And because it's kind of a scary movie, you feel like you need to be checking the perimeter, trying to see, is there something watching them from the side, from the shadows? What's that up in the distance? And it just gives you this unsettling feeling. And I loved where the movie went. I thought the ending was unexpected, but really well done. And, all this from a movie that just kind of came out of nowhere. It was just a little, I think it was a little film festival movie. And I loved it. I reviewed it on my channel. And I wasn't sure what people might think about it because it just was this kind of unknown movie. But people watched it and came back and said, "Oh no, this was a really good movie." I agree with you. So I feel pretty safe recommending it, especially if you have a love of um, old science fiction, classic, the Twilight Zone and things like that. It's like this little episode in these two characters' lives. Um, I really enjoyed it.
The Vast of Night.
Yes.
Okay. See, here you go again. You're making these great recommendations to me. So I have to go. What am I going to do? Maybe I should try to. Maybe I can find it in my own streaming applications. I'm not sure, but because I don't have that many streaming
Mhm.
apps, I have a couple, and maybe I'll look for it afterwards. And so, oh, thank you so much. Or try to find a DVD of it or something. Hopefully, I'm very excited for this. The Vast of Night. So. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for these great recommendations. And also the Third Man. We have to talk about the Third Man next time then.
Yes.
Oh
I could
my
talk
goodness.
about that movie forever.
Oh, good. I love the Third Man. I absolutely adore. Okay, all right, all right. We're gonna. Yeah, I'm sorry. I know you have to go soon. So, but we'll have to do that for part two. So, Jerome Weiselberry, thank you so much. So, just before we go, once again, for anyone who is meeting you for the first time, uh, where can we find you?
On
Just one more
YouTube.
plug for your channel on YouTube, please. Yes.
Yeah, I'm on YouTube, Jerome Weiselberry. Um, if if you misspell it in the search bar, I think it will still come up because I've tried that. um, I I am on Twitter, but I don't use it, so don't bother to try to find me on there. I'm not a social media person. I'm not really a technologically savvy person. This is YouTube is the thing that I do. So yeah, Jerome Weiselberry. That's the channel name.
All the information about the great channel Jerome Weiselberry will be in the description box of this video. And so please check out Jerome Weiselberry. It's a great channel, one of the best, one of my favorites. Please subscribe to the channel and interact with the community there and watch these great films. As you see right now, I've just gotten another great recommendation, so you can get so many great discussions. So please check out Jerome Weiselberry on YouTube. Thank you so much, my dear friend, for this. This was such an honor. I'm so privileged. Thank you so much for giving me this wonderful opportunity. I'm very very honored by this. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Really, thank you.
And as I say, let us do this again very soon. But in the meantime, please just continue to be well. And as I say, keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So, Jerome Weiselberry, my friends, thank you very much. Cheers.